Hi there, thanks very much for joining us today. We have a panel where we're exploring new income models and sources as secondary spend and ticket sales disappear, which is our fourth strand of work that we've been exploring during the UK pandemic. And it's linked to work with People Make It Work and Change Creation, and 5 strands of work that explore business plans, new working practices, new relationships with audiences, and reshaping our cultural offer. And today we've got Anna Dinnan and Ellen O'Hara with us. First of all, Anna and Ellen, it'd be great if you could introduce yourselves, and then let's have a conversation about this idea of new models and sources. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So my name's Anna Dinnan. I've been freelancing since 2016. I'm based in the Midlands, and I tend to work with small and medium-sized organisations on business and change planning and a bit of strategising. In recent years, there's been a lot of talk about income diversification, so we've done quite a lot of work in that area. And I also work with some of the funders, like the Arts Council and Nesta, around designing and evaluating programmes for innovation. Prior to being a freelancer, I was at Nesta for a couple of years, and before that at Arts Council England, working on organisational development.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen O'Hara, currently in the Derbyshire Dales, also a freelance coach and consultant, and I work with individual artists through to organisations and institutions, usually around building enterprise capability. So in practical terms, that might mean looking at business models or looking at how to diversify income, try on new products or services that have earned income potential, and a few other things. In terms of, similar to Anna really, a bit of programme design on top of that. And as well as working with People Make It Work, I also work with Nesta and a couple of other agencies, more on the kind of innovation side.
Brilliant, thank you. So I mentioned just now that we're thinking about kind of new income models and sources in this topic and today in this discussion. What sort of space does that question open up? What should we be exploring and thinking about in this area of work, do you think, as cultural organisations in this situation? Anna, do you want to start that?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, the first thing I think that strikes me is, going back to that title, 2 things I'd sort of pick out. One is, first of all, the word models, because I think lots of people have sort of different notions about what model might be. And I suppose that Ellen and I have been thinking about this a lot and trying to work out how we help unpack that word and what it means to us, and how it means, what it means for organisations trying to essentially to run a business at this really, really tricky time, when so many of those assumptions that underpinned all our thinking before have sort of fallen by the wayside, and we're not quite sure how they're going to start back up again. So there's this idea about a model being a kind of multi-dimensional thing that has lots of different component parts to it. So there's the part of your offer or your creative content or whatever that might be, the value proposition, that's sort of at the heart of it, the what. And then there's the how do we get it to people? How do we ensure that people enjoy and experience this and benefit from it? And then the bit about how does it pay for itself? How do we work out how the flows in and out might happen? And actually, just thinking about that title, as we sort of said at the beginning, it was about income models. But I think it's only sensible to look at both sides of the equation, because the income and expenditure are both really important parts, and they don't sort of operate independent of each other. So, I would definitely say that there's something about the relationship of income and expenditure and models, and I think this is a really, you know, it's a difficult time, but it's also potentially very exciting. There's all sorts of new partnerships opening up. There's a real opportunity to explore, you know, what if you shake things up, how might they all re-land together, and what can we do that's interesting, and that really essentially enables us to continue having a really great impact with the people that we are trying to serve.
Thanks, Anna. And where would you take that conversation, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Anna said, really, in terms of what constitutes a model, but also thinking about the who are we for as part of that as well. Really critically, is it the same, is it different? And also, I think something that both Anna and I observe, particularly when we're working with cultural organisations, is that there's more than one model operating at once. So something about the complexity, and it's not just about, okay, we have a model, we're going to make a change here. Actually, there's usually lots of models or kind of interrelated. So I think we'd both like to kind of open up the thinking about models as your model as a system, almost a system of things in interrelated parts. And if we make a change here, what difference does it, what kind of ripple effect does it have to the other parts? So not being too abstract about it, but just getting a better understanding of what our own models look like, you know, how they fit together, you know, and if we make a change here, what implications does that have for the rest of our organisation, and also those things that kind of sit connected into our organisation, so our partners and our audiences and our volunteers, and perhaps kind of challenging participants to think differently about what, you know, what constitutes their model, what do they include, and what, you know, what sits outside of that, and so that we're kind of seeing the bigger picture as well as honing in on some of the detail about where development and changes can be made.
Thank you, that's really interesting. So do you think, have we got the right title for this strand of thinking, exploring new income models and sources as secondary and ticket sales disappear? Like, we wrote that in March when we sort of decided to create these like 5 strands of inquiry and develop tools that, you know, people across the cultural sector could access, and that our change creation program would kind of go through an intense relationship with. And it's now June. I'm wondering whether it is about income, or whether there are other ways of thinking about those new models that might be worth, like it might be worth reflecting that in the title or the question that we're asking.
I don't think it's a wholly redundant title, and I think what Anna and I expect to do is perhaps look at some of the other areas that participants have already started to explore, like partnerships, but through the lens of money, or through the lens of models and money. So I think income is still relevant, and it will still be a kind of central folk kind of lens. Maybe it's more about value creation that leads to revenue, and actually just going back to that as a core principle, you know, building on what people are learning about the needs of their audience and the value that they already create and could create in the future, and then how that leads to different sources of income. So it's more about value than income, I think, for me.
I think that's right. I'd add as well, I mean, I think the name came from a really particular moment of, you know, sort of horrid realization that what we were heading for, essentially, and this being the start of a very, very difficult time, and it kind of dawning on us that that's a sort of long-term pathway, really, around the challenges of raising income, and certainly raising income in ways that we were used to doing that. So I think it recognises that. I think some of the things that I'm seeing is that our individual circumstances, whether that's as individuals or organisations, or whatever, through the pandemic is so different. There is a whole spectrum of situations out there, and for some organisations that, you know, the income driver is extremely, extremely real. And for others, this point about value, that rethinking value, particularly things like how might we sustain our relationships with people in a different kind of way, is really interesting. So I think that's, you know, we've recognised that it came from a particular time, but people's own, where you're starting from now is going to be quite different. I think it's fair to say that we will talk money. I mean, that's definitely it's kind of a key element of it. And things like the place, it's interesting, you know, a couple of organisations, what was hitherto secondary income, like, for example, becoming a much more significant source of income than has been in the mix in the past. And you know, Ellen and I would be interested in, well, what does that do for the rest of the shape of your operations, or how do you scale that? You know, how do you take what has hitherto been a smaller part of the operation and take that to a new level? So it's all that kind of, so we are the place, if you like, for that kind of conversation. And I think we will try and, you know, it won't all be in sort of accountancy speak, as it were, but that's an important part of what we do need to talk about it.
I think it's thinking about money in a, you know, in that holistic way, and how it enables the impact, and that's why I think the point Anna made about expenditure and income is important, particularly thinking to the future about building reserves and resilience for future shocks. I think this is a great opportunity to be kind of reinterrogating that. And our views about making a surplus or profit and how much, and where that might come from in the model into the future. You know, where we might invest, if we have any money to invest, where we might make those investments for the longer term, those sorts of things.
And I think Ellen just mentioning the word sort of impact there is also perhaps to sort of say, Ellen and I are really interested in what we call the alternative finance sector, which is, you know, there's a lot of impact narrative, if you like, as part of that. So that's, you know, your crowdfunding and social investment, those forms of finance that don't come through traditional banking routes, or, you know, the grant funders as they were of yore. And so that's an interesting thing to play into this conversation, is when you think about the forms of finance that are available or might be available, how does that also change the way that you set up the model, the idea? And equally, how do we take a model and apply that to the concerns of those who might be able to provide finance, whether that's individuals through like a crowdfunding platform, or a community voluntary foundation, or a social investment funder, that kind of thing. So again, that's something that we'll try and sort of be able to explore a little bit in this area.
Right. It definitely feels to me that that question about value, that orientation towards value, feels of this moment even more than it felt of a moment a few months ago, where we might have been thinking, you know, how do we carry on doing what we're doing with what we've always been doing with less money. And I think or even in 3 months, kind of like, as a sector, been exploring much more fundamental questions than that, and that therefore takes us into that territory, doesn't it? And, you know, we know that the conversations that we're having across these 5 strands of work really interlay and interweave, and, you know, the questions about how we work and how we reimagine our relationships with audiences and understand the needs of the communities that we're working with, how we evolve the way that we're presenting work, and who that's made with, for and by, whose voices are heard, and how we empower and ensure relevance in our communities, and across our practice. All of those things kind of end up having implications for our model, don't they? They lead into, you know, at some point they kind of converge into a conversation about how does that function in an organisation.
Absolutely.
Where does the fuel come from? And you know, that feels like, you know, we're in that. This bit is looking at that, isn't it? In order that we can then rebuild our business plans and, you know, see a different, build a different budget that kind of reflects different types of activity and different types of sources of value.
Yeah, and it feels to me if we were ever in this place, we've moved away from the how can we tweak the model to essentially sustain the status quo to actually it's not just changing one part which already has an effect on everything else. There are 2 or 3 elements our community needs in particular that are fundamentally different. The way we're able to work is fundamentally different. Some of the secured income is fundamentally different, and so that's a big disruption. Actually, and I think that affords us a really brilliant opportunity to think a lot more radically than we might normally feel comfortable doing, because some of those decisions are almost been taken out of our hands in some respects, or they're or gifted to us. I would like to think about it in that way, and that actually we have got an opportunity, as Anna said, so things have been shaken up, and so it's about how can we really understand all of those different component parts and start to have a process for rebuilding them in a way that shores us up for the future.
And I have to say, I'm so excited about doing this. I'm so excited also about the timing of it, because, essentially over the last few months, we've seen so many organisations have a go at taking a completely novel approach to work that they have been doing. And there are some really interesting examples out there, but there's also just this, there's an opportunity to kind of slightly look back at what have we done? What does that say about how easy or difficult it is to introduce change into our model? Can we more consciously create the space within our operations, within our culture, within our leadership style, all of these kind of things, to make us just more efficient at this whole process of generating new models or testing new models and sort of seeing where they go. And because we've had this quite extraordinary left field sort of experience, that the perfect question, the what if question, has already sort of happened. We've had to scramble for that what if. And that's essentially what new modelling is about. Is like, well, what if we did this? What if this? What if we compared this, or recombine this, or evolve this, or and that sort of sense of a bit of play, the kind of creativity that you'd see in the creative process, but applied to the hows and the nuts and bolts of how you kind of actually get it there. And I just think that the rawness and the relative recentness of having to do all the new is a great, also just really great to be having this discussion about new models, with that as the backdrop.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And it feels like for lots of organisations and leaders, their business model essentially they were kind of locked in, and I think both locked in and therefore quite obscure. Like what actually was going on within that model wasn't necessarily as evident as it would be if you're a new organisation sort of setting out. And that's kind of been blown apart in lots of cases, and then you can kind of see the constituent parts, can't you, and make decisions and start to think differently about how that might all fit together. What kind of principles or considerations should people have in mind when they're exploring and investigating around this area of new models of value?
I might have said some of this before, but I think for me, thinking as a system is really critical, and thinking about what's really thinking about where our organisations stop and start, and therefore what's in the model, and what's adjacent to the model. Maybe it's kind of, I don't know whether that's a question more than a principle, I think. But I guess it's broadly thinking in systems or thinking very holistically, I think is quite important. Other principles, a good question. Anna, I'm going to hand over to you.
I think test not build is like probably one that if your innovation muscles are a bit sort of weak and underutilized, then I would definitely go to the test not build place, and thinking not how do we put it together from scratch, but how do we develop an idea, test it, hone it, come back to it, think about how it scales, all that kind of stuff. So the test not build thing, I think, is really useful to have in mind. And that idea that the kind of just, it's a constant learning process, and that validation, how does this play out for the people that it's directed for? I think going back to what Ellen said at the start of the conversation, you know, about the place of the person that you're developing this for is really, really important. I think that what if question is super powerful and super useful. And to me, there's something about what's your, how much are you prepared to discard as you go? I think there's like, not every idea that comes on the slate is going to kind of make it through. And so going into it with the sort of mindset that sort of says, well, we'll try three things at a very basic level, and if one of them comes off, that would be brilliant, you know, sort of thing. But also going back to your point about the money and the value thing, I do think it's worth, before you start playing around with new models, thinking, what are we looking for the new model to achieve for us? Is that income? Is it, you know, is that our most urgent driver sort of thing? Is it about the relationships? Is it about the quality of the user experience? Is it, or I use that term, but you know, how impactful is it for people? And it's just, I think it is worth sort of knowing in your mind which of those is foremost for you at this particular time, and then designing a model around that, rather than because it could just otherwise be open-ended play, and we're all kind of cash poor. We haven't got the time and the attention to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. So it feels like I've got a sense of what we should be asking and what we are exploring in this strand of work, and how we might rethink the question in a way, what we need to be open to. And I think, you know, I think you've set out some of the questions we might be asking ourselves. Are there any other areas that you think we need to explore during this panel before we come to a close today?
I guess just to build on Anna's point about the kind of testing process, this is about learning. I think whatever happens over the next few months, I think being kind to ourselves and remembering that even the needs of our audiences, for instance, are going to continue to evolve over the next months and even years, and we'll be evolving with them, we'll be developing with them. So whatever we get right now might not be relevant in 6 months, but we'll learn a lot from it. I once heard this phrase in an innovation agency called the innovation compost. You know, just the idea of, you know, nothing's lost, everything's an insight, even if you're invalidating an assumption, or you know that something is wrong, that's still really valuable. Which again, it's just building on that same principle, really. And I think going into a process like that with that spirit, that the questions at this stage will be, you know, the focus rather than the answers, and the answers will be found in the doing.
Very good. Anything finally from you, Anna?
I just love innovation compost.
I'm loving that.
I think that's good, because we're, you know, I know that a few people have been out in their gardens trying to get things going, so that really lands for me. I think that's exactly right. Ellen and I have talked about, you know, just how great it would be to have a kind of scratch night for new models, you know, and perhaps I keep having this, it's really terrible, but I keep having this idea of undressing the model in my mind. There's a framework, there's a sort of structure underneath that. I think the more fluent we can kind of become in understanding what that skeleton kind of looks like, and if you move this one piece, you know, I think the better. So I really hope that sort of, you know, thinking about that in different ways, and seeing what often we think that our model, you know, in our organisation is really completely different to someone else's. But once you sort of start to unpack it, you could kind of see that the framework or the skeleton that sits underneath is very similar. And I think that will help, you know, in a sense that will always help us if we can help us move around the sector, or help us understand what the possibilities for change are. It will help us go hunting for really exciting models from elsewhere if we know what we're kind of looking for. So, yeah, that and skeletons and compost, maybe. New name.
Thank you. So I love that. I'm yeah, a gardener.
And it'll be fun.
So, you know, I'm loving the compost. I'm not hoping to find any skeletons, but I love the idea of that sort of wireframe, that underlying like structure that sits within our organisations, that coding that helps us to, you know, really understand how maybe it's like the circulation in a way. Rather than the bones, you know, how value moves around the organisation. It's really helpful to understand, isn't it?
Yeah.
See, I just brought that skeleton back to life. It's now got a heart and some blood. So,
but that's the point, you see.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you're
that flow of money and that flow of creativity,
the life has returned. I love that. So if you're accessing this video Make It Work website, then over the coming weeks, you'll see more tools and resources turning up that unpack some of the thoughts that we've been exploring now, and give you practical tools that you can use to explore these questions and open up the organisation that you lead or work within, and explore ways that you can innovate and generate new sources of value. If you're on the Change Creation Programme, then there'll be a series of workshops that will be happening over this coming month, some intensives to sort of support you through that process. For now, I'd like to thank Ellen O'Hara and Ellen, have I just joined your names? Ellen O'Hara and Anna Dinnan. I don't know what I just did, whether I said one name and the other, got confused, all that talk of compost. Thank you both ever so much for joining us today, and look forward to this conversation kind of evolving over the coming weeks. Thanks very much for now.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Anna.